Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT podcasts. This is going to be a CARS reading skills workshop with both me, Molly, and Jack. This episode, we will be talking about our Jack Westin CARS daily passage titled Urban Species. It's the passage that went live on October 8th, which is the day this is posted. So if you happen to be listening to this podcast on October 8th, you can navigate to our website, jackweston.com, and give the passage a try before we dive in. We will be going through each sentence one by one and kind of talking about what we should grab in terms of the arguments and the key points from each sentence and from each paragraph. And then, of course, we'll also reflect at the end of each passage about what kind of the main point was. This is a great exercise for those of us that are struggling in CARS or wanting to find how to improve. And of course, if you're listening to this and it's not October 8th, check out the link that we've got in our description. It'll take you right there. So, Jack, I'm excited to chat about this one. It feels like this one is a more straightforward read compared to some of the other ones that we do.
Right. It's more straightforward for sure. But the topic is not necessarily the most interesting to students. It could be. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. I think the key
Hmm.
here is the structure, right? And this is a question I get from students every single week. Can I find the main idea in the first paragraph or the last paragraph? Is there a general kind of structure that most of these passages follow? And the answer is no. Like every single author is very unique in how they want to convey their ideas and messages. And so every single structure is going to be a little different. And so
Yeah.
we're going to see, a straightforward structure, but it is still unique, right? Like it's not
Mhm.
something we've ever really encountered, at least not on this podcast. So I'm excited to jump into it and kind of dive into like how this author is different than every other author we've had.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because um I hear this all the time from students of like, are cars passages always anything? And the answer is absolutely not. Right? It's like each passage is a completely different person who wrote it. And
Right.
ultimately, every single person that you interact with in your daily life has a completely different perspective and way of speaking. And, like imagine everyone that has ever told you a story. Like there are so many differences in, some people will just say the moral of the story at the very beginning. Some people make you wait the entire time for it. Like everyone has their own different pacing, their different, voice that they share these ideas with. Like each Cars passage is just a person and their ideas. Like you can never, it's like to say like, oh, is everybody going to be this way? Is every patient going to have this problem? Like, no, it's your job to figure it out. So,
That's exactly right.
yeah.
It's
So
annoying,
I love
right?
that you bring that up.
I find like students find that to be annoying simply because in biology and physics, and there's
Hmm.
a lot of exceptions in chemistry even, right? And chemistry is
Hmm.
full of exceptions. But like we tend to, especially if you're science oriented, we tend to follow rules, right? And we want rules. And it's interesting because our program, our course, the things that we do, we try to make rules in how you read and how you look at things, but the actual thing you're looking at will always be different, right? And
Hmm.
and and that's just practice. That again, I mean, I always say this, I preach this every single week, right? Is if the more you look at these passages, the more time you spend on this text, the easier just gets now. It just I don't know why. It's just interesting because our brains calibrate to reading these kinds of things. So
Hmm.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a skill at the end of the day, being able to pay attention, close attention, and not bring all your own biases and thoughts and perspectives. Yeah, it's a skill. If you work on it, it'll get better.
Right.
So so let's get some work on it, right?
Yeah.
Let's dive in with this passage. Again, it's urban species. You can always check out the link in our descriptions if you're not listening to this on the day the episode came out. So let's go ahead and hop in with paragraph one. It says, the urban sociologist Robert Park once wrote, quote, the city and the urban environment represent man's most consistent and, on the whole, his most successful attempt to remake the world he lives in more into his heart's desire. Okay, so this is a quote from Robert Park, right? This is something that we need to track with Robert Park specifically. I don't know if the author agrees with this, but the argument in this sentence is essentially that making a city allows us to kind of shape the world into what we want, right? Into our heart's desire. It's all about the construction of cities and kind of what that sort of teaches us about ourselves, I guess. So the creation of cities and the impact. Again, this is Robert Park's idea. This is all a direct quote. So we need to track Park as well. And just so
Yeah,
you know, if you're listening to this only, the quote did not end there. We're actually going to see another sentence or two that's still part of this same quote.
right, right. Well, we're just going to break down this sentence before we go on to the next, just to make
Mhm.
sure everyone is on the same page. So this is a very important sentence because it does establish that we're talking about, I guess, urban sociology, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Robert Park is an urban sociologist. So the city, urban environment represent man's most consistent and on the whole, his most successful attempt to remake the world, right? So in a way, the man is remaking the world through the city. Uh,
Mhm.
that's all I know from this, right? And it's making it in the way that his heart's desire, right? So, okay, all right, that's all I know. And that is something that Park is stating, not the author. We need to distinguish, create a distinction between the author and whoever else they bring up, right? So
Yeah.
in this case, Park. Okay,
Yeah. It doesn't mean that the author can't agree with Park, but we can't guarantee that yet.
right,
We got to be patient. We got to
right.
figure that out. Okay, let's look at our next sentence. But if the city is the world which man created, it is the world in which he is henceforth condemned to live. Whew. Got a bit of a switch up in our tone there. We had said again, we're making cities and remake the world. And we even said this is the most successful, most consistent. I was thinking, okay, the author may, we'll have to see, but the author may have a positive perspective about this, but henceforth condemned to live in the place that, man designed. That's a pretty strong word there, condemned, right? That's so they're stuck. You're stuck with whatever you've made, essentially, is the argument here. And again, we did start with that, but so there is that transition between ideas.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that contrast word changes everything. It's like a complete 180 because now we're going into something that's even more important to the author, right? Or at
Hmm.
least Park in this case, because this is not the author's position necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Even though the author is bringing up someone else's point of view, the author could end up challenging it, could agree with it, could just not do anything with it. So don't put this on the author, right? This is still Park, right? And so Park is saying that yes, exactly what you said. Like they'll make their world, right? But then they end up having to like live in it and suffer through it so, to some
Yeah.
extent, right?
Yeah.
And so it seems like this is a bad thing, right? And if
Hmm.
you don't understand the whole condemned to live, you don't have to. You just have to know, okay, there's a switch up. That contrast word, the but, the yet, the however, those kinds of contrast words, when you see that, you know, okay, we're changing direction. Maybe this isn't so good, right? Maybe there's a negative to this. I look at everything in terms of positive and negative. Is this going in a like a positive kind of direction or in a negative direction? And it's obvious this is kind of negative, right? But
Hmm.
not so negative, right? We have to have a good way of noticing the degree, like how negative could this really be, right? So we have to see where this goes. But so far, this is just Park's point of view, and we have to keep going, keep away, be aware of everything that's been said because it's going to help you understand the rest of this paragraph. Okay.
Okay. Let's finish up Park's quote. We have one more sentence that's still part of this extended quote from Park. Thus, indirectly, and without any clear sense of the nature of his task, the city man has remade himself. Okay, I feel like this is a little more concise and clear, right? We had said before that we kind of remake ourself by making cities, but that seems like, it's continued here, but kind of stated in a much nicer way. We still know that this is not necessarily a great thing. Might not be the worst thing in the world, But again, we're remaking ourselves in this process, just
Could
kind
make
of tying us up.
Yeah, this could make sense, but it's kind of hard to understand. I don't understand the whole remaking yourself. Is it because you make something that you end up living in and you end up having to benefit from and also have problems with, right? Because
Hmm.
you, that I guess that's the idea, but it's not that clear and it's not like said so easily.
Hmm.
But again, one of the things that I love about the MCAT, right? If you love anything about it, is that ultimately, if they care about an idea, whether it's a cars idea, a science idea, they will mention it explicitly in a way that anyone can understand it. And nothing in this paragraph so far is as direct as I'd like. And you'll get a sense for that when you practice a lot. And so I'd wait until I see something that very much clears this up. Okay.
All right. And our last sentence says, just as men make cities, cities make men. There's that sentence you were waiting for, Jack.
Right. Right.
Much more straightforward. For a paragraph like this and a last statement like this, I feel like it's worthwhile noting again, the majority of our passage was one giant quote from Robert Park. This last sentence is not a quote from Robert Park. This is now the author, but the author has essentially summed up this extended quote from Robert Park. So, men make cities, which then make men. Like in my head, when I think of what I would want to map, which by the way, if you're curious about mapping strategy, come see us in our free sessions every week. Men, arrow cities, arrow men. Like men make cities, cities makes men.
That's
We want to
really,
tie that to Park.
isn't that so like again, like it's sort of annoying, right? Because you read this whole paragraph and it's so complicated, it's so deep, right? Like the way they write it. I mean, we could read it, we can understand it, but then there is a sentence like at the very end that clears everything up. And this is when I get a student who asks, well, does that happen every time? Can I just read the last sentence of every paragraph? No, no, like the author could have easily put this sentence at the beginning of this paragraph, right?
Mhm.
Or in the middle of this paragraph somehow, right? So like we will never be able to create some sort of strategy around where to find information. There's no
Mhm.
shortcut. We have to read everything. We have to consider everything. But don't be too bogged down by very, very complicated or deep sentences because I assure you, at some point, whether it's in the beginning, in the middle, at the end, it will clear up, right? And it just happened that at the end of this paragraph, it very much cleared it up. And it gave us, like that was good context for this sentence, right? Like all of that made this sentence make even more sense. So it's not like it's a waste of time to read it, right? You should read it because you could be asked about Park, right? You want to make sure you know what Park was saying. Okay, cool.
Okay. Let's take a look at our next paragraph. So that was all P1. Let's move into P2. Many species, as Carrie Lewontin points out, quote, adapt to the environments they alter and so initiate a long evolutionary process of transforming themselves and others, end quote. Okay, so we've got a new individual now that we're citing. So this is Lewontin. And I want to point out that there's a lot of parallels from the idea in P1, but we're not talking about men and cities. What we're talking about is species and evolution. So it kind of has this like almost parallel nature. We're talking about how species can change their environment and then they adapt to that changed environment. It's very similar, and yet we're talking about many species and probably, right? I mean, of course, as MCAT students, we know a fair amount about biology, right? Evolution takes a while. It even says that it's long. So it's like a parallel argument, and yet the context is totally different. So species and evolution instead of men making cities, which is obviously a much shorter time frame. Very interesting. So we've broadened this perspective by a lot. We'll see if we narrow it back down to the scope of the argument in P1 or if we continue to make this larger and larger, but this is an idea that we want to tie with Lewontin. So we're
Cool.
basically, yeah, it's similar idea, but different context with
Right.
species.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
Sounds
Okay, human beings have proven particularly adept at such a process, and the idea that quote, man makes himself, to use Gordon Child's title of Long Ago, also has a long and fertile history. Okay, I want to note that our sentence with Lewontin was broader about species and evolution. The very next sentence, though, makes it specific again to humans. So I'm probably not expecting to see how beetles and giraffes and orangutans do this, right? Like we're right back on humans the very next sentence. So it seems like at the very least we're talking about man, but I expect to see cities come back up again. So humans do this and we're particularly good at it. We're narrowing the scope back to possibly, possibly to the thing that we saw in P1.
That was a great insight, right? Very, very good perspective. Right. Okay. Let's keep going.
All right. We transform ourselves through transforming our world. Okay, this is almost exactly our idea from P1, but I want to note that we're transforming the world. We're not transforming specifically cities. So, yes, humans do this. Other species do it, according to Lewontin, but the author is arguing that humans do this to a particularly strong extent. So, we're like, almost there back to our P1 idea, but I don't know if we'll come back to cities.
Right.
It's interesting to watch this develop.
Yeah.
Okay, and it is increasingly the environment defined by urbanization that becomes the central milieu within which this adaptive and transformative process occurs. Boom, here we are, right? Typically, when cars passages describe urban, what they mean is cities. Um, it's kind of a confusing sentence, but that word urbanization makes me think, okay, we're probably going to tie this back to our idea from P1. We've got one last sentence, and it might be the clincher for us. Let's look at that, and then we'll reflect on the paragraph. It says, man has become a city dweller and is adapting to that role. Awesome. Okay, Jack, what do you think?
I mean, this was literally the same exact point from the
Mm-hmm.
last paragraph, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this made our lives easy. But then
Mm-hmm.
why go through all of this? Why have two paragraphs that say the exact same thing, pretty much, right?
Yeah, it's
What
just to show the author cares,
yeah,
right? Look
yeah.
at how much time they're willing to spend kind of holding our hands and walking us through this. They're trying to make sure that we don't ever doubt it, right? Like,
Yeah.
look at how much I care about this based on how much I will talk about it.
The part that I think boggles students' minds because they're used to reading textbooks that are very direct, that tell you exactly what you need to know. They don't sugarcoat it. They don't have to explain it 100 times. They've been mentioned it one time and that's it, right? The part
Mhm.
about this that is very different than every other section or any other test you ever take is you're reading articles that are based on opinion, right? And so
Mhm.
you're reading an article that the author, whoever this person is, did a lot of research, obviously, right? Because this person read about Robert Park, read about Carrie Lewontin, right? The point is, they are trying to find some sort of truth that they believe in, right? And in order for them to kind of make that opinion that they have a truth, they have to express it in an article in this way. It has to be an argumentative article, right?
Mhm.
We have to look at this and go, okay, do we agree or do we disagree with this point? Do you, and it's that concept is very difficult to understand when you're just learning science because most science is just factual, right? We either have gravity or we don't have gravity, right? And it's interesting because even gravity was debated back then, right? Hundreds of years ago, right? Does gravity actually exist? And the way we proved it is through experimentation, right? The author
Mhm.
is trying to prove their point by bringing up examples, by bringing up other people, right? And that's exactly what they're doing here. Instead of giving you experiments that, oh, hey, by the way, men create their world and their world shapes them, the author is just deciding, okay, I'm going to bring up these really important people, right? Robert Park, who's an academic, Carrie Lewontin, who's an academic, and I'm going to just use them as my source of support, right? And so
Mhm.
hopefully if you read this, you believe it. You believe what I'm trying to say because these other two people also believed it, right? And so
Mhm.
the author is trying to use the social proof method to kind of convince everyone reading it that what they're saying is actually true. Because we could debate this. We could say, well, no, even though men create their world doesn't actually change them at all. They're stubborn and they are the way they are, right? And so I think that that mental shift of, hey, I'm reading something that is very fluid and that is not necessarily true, and I need to find support and I need to understand it in this way. If you can do that, guys, you're in a great position for cars. And so I think this is a
Yeah.
great example of that.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, every passage is persuasive. You just have to figure out what they're trying to persuade you of.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool.
Okay, let's take a look at our third paragraph here. So, while it is plausible to argue for some kind of co-evolution between human biological characteristics and cultural forms over the long term, the explosion of cultural understandings and practices in the past few hundred years has left no time for biological adaptation. Okay, this sentence, I think, to the average person would be really overwhelming, but I think this is probably the sentence that most students that have started studying for science are excited by. They're like, "Oh wait, know about evolution. I know about biological characteristics. Like, yay, this is familiar." It's not really that familiar. We're basically suggesting here that culture is evolving faster than we are, right? Than biology evolves. Not the most clear sentence, but I think for those of us who are really interested and excited by science, this is probably going to be the one that we perk up for because we're talking about biology. We're not just talking about men and cities and urbanization. We're talking about biology. Um, but again, we're talking about the difference between cultural development and human evolution. We'll probably get this in a more clear sentence, but hopefully by this sentence, we've got your attention because it sounds familiar. It sounds like something we can hold on to that suits our interests.
Great.
Okay, let's see. So we have not had time to properly properly adapt to the changes we make. Okay, so that's stated much easier. We don't have the little bio buzzwords, but you know what? It's the same, right? Culture is shifting faster than we can adapt. That's the main message there. Okay. Nevertheless, there are basic possibilities and constraints derived from our species' character. So I'm getting some hint of like limitation, but I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to interpret this. I feel like at this point, most of our MCAT friends have their like science hat on. They're thinking, okay, what exactly does this mean in a scientific sense? Like our species are limited in what, how fast they could adapt. This is cars. It's not actually science, right? Again, I'm getting some hint of limitations, but I'm going to wait and see what the our author means by this because I don't think there's one objective scientific meaning. And even then, we don't know if this individual is a scientist. We don't know anything about the author except what they tell us. So I would
Right.
stay tuned and just see what we learn about this statement.
Sounds good.
Okay, the nature of our species suggests how we will adapt. Okay, that's a little more clear, right? Still, I'm wondering. I feel like the point about culture developing faster than we adapt makes more sense than the nature of our species suggesting how we will adapt, but I think it's stated clear enough. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, straightforward. I mean, I do want to mention the whole sentence with "we have and not had enough time." That is the author saying that.
Hmm.
It
True.
we is important there, right? Because
Yeah.
it could have said others believe that we don't have enough time, but it's very clear that the author believes this. But then you're right, the author is trying to make this transition into the nature of species.
Hmm.
And so, although it is true that we don't have enough time to adapt in the traditional evolutionary biology way, our species has a certain nature that wants to adapt, right? And so I think that's the bigger point that the author is trying to expand on, and we should just keep reading and try to understand the context behind it.
Yeah. Okay, the last sentence here in paragraph 3 says, elsewhere, I have considered these under the headings of one, competition and the struggle for existence, two, diversification and differentiation, three, collaboration, cooperation, and mutual aid, four, environmental transformations, for example, urbanization, five, the production and reconfiguration of space, and six, the transformation of temporalities. Okay, I need to acknowledge how hard it was, even for me, when reading this out loud, not to speed through this sentence, right? I feel like every student is going to do one of two things when they read a sentence like this. They're either going to completely speed through it and like not even pay attention at all because it's a giant list, or they're going to be really scared that this is a list and they're going to try and fit every single one of these six things into their map. Like, I don't think you need to go too far to either extreme. What you need to do is read it carefully and trying to understand why this is there, right? Like you mentioned, Jack, we've been saying we quite a bit in this passage. We just said I. I have considered these. This is obviously important to the author. This is their points, right? And clearly they're building on how species adapt. I saw a buzzword in there, which is urbanization, right? I'm feeling good about that. I feel like we're going to keep on our current path based on that word, but who knows? We'll have to see what happens in P4. But again, you can't zone out in a sentence like this. If you feel yourself starting to speed up or slow down, just bring yourself back to your previous reading pace. You're trying to figure out if you understand what's going on in this sentence. Take it bite by bite. Um, don't let your pace change with a sentence like this.
I totally agree. I mean, this, like, I think what you said would hit the nail on the head. Just be in the middle, right? Just process the information you're reading, but don't be too bogged down by all the details. Just
Hmm.
absorb it and be confident in that you've read it and you understand it. And it makes sense, right? Like our nature of our species adapts and you can consider these different kinds of ways, right? Competition maybe impacts it, diversification, collaboration, other like just process and understand how that adaptation could actually kind of fit into all of these different ways of doing it. So other than that, I don't think you need to write any of it down. So what do you think is the big idea of this paragraph? Like there seem to be two major points, but is there one that overrides the other, or are they both important? What do you think there, Molly?
Well, we definitely talked about the development of culture versus the development of biology, right? Or biological adaptation. That was made, it was supported, right? Basically, we adapt slowly is kind of the key point there. And then we have this idea that the way that we adapt relates to our species as a whole, right? So I feel like those are kind of the two arguments that we have. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. It almost feels like the second one is trying to explain why we adapt slowly. Again, the nature of our species suggests how we will adapt. So, like, it almost seems like we're saying we adapt slower than culture develops. And, we adapt because of the species that we're in. Um, so those are the two that I kind of see.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you can keep track of those two ideas, you're good for this paragraph. So
Mhm.
it seems like we've only had three ideas and we only have three paragraphs. And that's normal, right? Every paragraph you normally have one idea, but sometimes you have two ideas, two really important ideas in a paragraph, maybe sometimes three, right? And in some paragraphs you have no ideas, right?
Yeah.
So in this structure of this passage, what we've seen is the same idea repeat in paragraph 1 and 2, right? Which is that men make cities and that in turn shapes them, right? That's been supported by Park, by Lewontin, right? And then we have this paragraph that has two kind of distinct ideas. We're not talking about cities anymore. We're just talking about adaptation in general, right? One
Mhm.
is that we don't have time to properly adapt to the changes we make. And two, the nature of our species suggests how we will adapt, right? And it gives all the details in that. So I think if you keep track of those arguments, you're going to get all the questions right for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm. All right, let's see what we do in paragraph 4. It says cities are, after all, large scale collaborative enterprises incorporating competitive processes diversifications, in parentheses, divisions of labor, of function of lifestyles and values, the production of built environments, of spaces, and of divergent temporalities. Okay, I'm recognizing a lot of what we read in the last sentence. I don't think it's absolutely critical. I'm just recognizing that we're restating some of the support that we had about like the nature of species, suggesting how we adapt. Now it just sounds like we're tying it to cities, right? Which is wonderful. I'm seeing all those words from our last sentence, but cities incorporate these. So we're back on cities and men. Hooray. We took a little detour there for paragraph 3 and just talked generally about adaptation, but we're back to cities,
Right. Right.
which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's normal here, right? And this even this sentence is pretty difficult to understand. So let's keep going
It
and see
is.
what
Yeah, I feel like I don't know exactly what they're trying to mean with this, but I do just recognize some of the words that were used, and
exactly.
that can help at least give us some context. Let's check our next sentence. Planning better cities would bring out our cooperative nature, or cooperative rather than our competitive nature. Okay, now this is not something we've ever said before, right? We're talking about how to make cities better. If we were going to plan better cities, we should foster cooperation. So, cooperation rather than competition. That is pretty straightforward. And, we've talked about how, no, we've talked about the fact that we make cities and are made in the process, but we have not talked about how to make cities, how cities should be designed in a good or a bad sense. So this is new. Better cities are cooperative instead of competitive. That's an argument.
Yeah, sounds good. So planning it right, will it, the right a certain way, right? Planning it better will end up making it more cooperative. Okay.
Hmm. Okay, the way cities segregate us now breeds competition as the real estate market pits neighborhoods against each other. Okay, so this is building off the idea in the previous sentence, right? A better city would foster cooperation. Right now, we foster competition. So it's like this contrast of what we do now versus what we could do that would be better.
Right.
Um, and that distinction, I think, is important to recognize.
Exactly. I could see someone asking, well, they're saying that right now it's competitive, right? Well, that doesn't mean that you can't make it more cooperative, right? So the author's
Mhm.
argument still stands, even though right now it's competitive, right? The author's arguing that, look, if we plan better, we don't have to be competitive. We can be cooperative. So both of these arguments, I think, are really important to understand, and they are not, they can both exist together here, right? They both make sense given what the author's saying.
Yeah. And it's clearly the author's words. We haven't planted a quote in here and tied it to somebody else. Like this is the argument from the author. Um, and they're saying what's better. Like I feel like that's a pretty good thing to clue into. You learn a lot about the author when they tell you like, oh, this is a better thing than the other. Right?
Right.
Like, okay, what do you care about? What do you value, author? We don't want to make assumptions, but I feel like it gives a lot of good context when you hear authors uh, kind of speculate on these things, right? They tell you their arguments.
Right.
Okay, last sentence. It says a different kind of organization might bring out more community oriented results. Sounds like cooperation to me, right? If we plan differently, we would be cooperative or more community oriented. So it sounds like we're just kind of bringing it back to competition's not the only way to do it. We organize it differently, we might get a different, more cooperative result. Um, so really, for this paragraph, I would track both of those ideas.
That's it. Yep. So we have two ideas in one paragraph, which is again not that abnormal, right? That's pretty normal. That's pretty common.
Hmm. And for context, anyone listening to this, if you're like, okay, it's not abnormal to have two ideas in one paragraph. If as we start getting into like 3 or 4, some students are like, Molly, Jack, I find 6 arguments per paragraph. Like it gets more rare the farther that you get from like the 1 and the 2. Okay. If you find like every single sentence in a whole 6 or 7 sentence paragraph as an argument, we might want to look a little deeper. Some of those sentences might be the same argument. But two, even potentially three, but I feel like that's pretty rare.
That's rare too. Yeah, I would say most paragraphs have zero, one, two, or three ideas. You're
Yeah,
not going to find more than three. I mean, maybe once out of every 100 passages, but again, like how many
if
passages
that.
it has like has a paragraph with four ideas, but that's
Yeah.
super duper rare. So I would say just look for one or two, and sometimes again zero. Sometimes it's all filler. There's really nothing there.
Hmm.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good gauge.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at what is this? Paragraph five. Can we reasonably aspire to consciously intervene in this process of, quote, remaking ourselves through urbanization, even perhaps acquire some, another quote, clear sense of the nature of our task? Okay, this is kind of, I think, a complex sentence. We're asking, can we consciously intervene in this process? And it sounds like of shaping cities, but I think this sentence is not clear. It's not easy. It's a hypothetical sentence, though, or it's a hypothetical question posed to the reader. And most often, if you pose a hypothetical question to me, what I care about most is, are you going to answer it? Like, are you just going to let it hang and move on and never talk about it again? In which case, I don't care. But if you pose a hypothetical question to me and then you answer your own question, I'm then left to ask, why did you ask me that? And it's because they wanted to get us as the reader to think about it before they told us their belief. That's that's useful, right? Like that to me is showing that they care, right? They want to grab your attention so that you are paying attention when they tell you what they feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, let's see, right? Something about conscious intervening in this process, kind of abstract, but I assume hopefully we'll get an answer. If we decide that we want cities to bring out the cooperative, better angels of our nature, we can start designing them to do so.
Hmm.
Sounds familiar. Sounds just like the sentence or the paragraph that we had before. That said, though, I feel like tone wise and word choice wise, this is kind of interesting, right? Cooperative and better. That's not something that is new. We mentioned that before, but angels of our nature
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that's
that's a
that's
good.
got some good tone indication there.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was great. Like it seems like the author prefers cooperative, right? Why would
Hmm.
the author associate it to angels, right? Angels who not like angels, right? Angels are holy and they're good, they're positive, right? And so
Hmm.
to some to anyone who's reading this, you should kind of sense that okay, the author likes this idea of cooperation, right? And so yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. One last sentence here in P5. It is at this point that commonalities and universal values enter back into the picture, for without discussion and debate upon them, we are left with nothing other than the cumulative effects of micro actions, contingencies, and chance as central to human evolution. Okay. I don't know about you, Jack, but I was coming out of the last sentence like, woohoo. It sounds like P4, right? Like we've seen this already. Better cities are more cooperative. And then I reached this sentence and I'm like, huh? What are we talking about here? It sounds like we're saying like if we don't go down this route, we are left with nothing other than something else. Like it seems like the author's using this sentence to say that cooperation is better, but I feel like this sentence is just so much less clear than the other ones. What do you
Yeah,
think?
but that is so true. And that's where a lot of students get tied up. But look, you've already found the meat of this sentence, right?
Hmm.
This paragraph, excuse me. And so stick to that, be confident in that, and let that guide you, right? And
Hmm.
you're right. Like this seems a little filler-like, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of the author kind of rambling in a way, right? But I don't sense that we're deviating. I don't sense that we're changing directions. I don't sense that the author is all of a sudden changing their mind. And so who cares, right? Like I'm not saying ignore it. I'll never say that. Absorb it, but don't be too tied up into it, right? Be
Yeah.
confident and move forward.
hmm Wow. I feel like hearing you say, but who cares, had to be cathartic for like half of our audience. Like, scary sentence. Who cares? You already figured out what was important. It's not an important sentence. That I feel like is the most freeing thing as a student, like recognizing that the most complicated, scary, intimidating sentences that you have nightmares about, those are not the sentences that we care about. Who
Right.
cares about those unless you sense that they're starting to shift the direction of the argument or they're adding something new? Keep reading, see what
Right.
happens.
Exactly. And again, practice allows you to decipher between the important essential sentences and the non-essential sentences. I'm not saying ignore the non-essential sentences, right? I'm saying just don't make it a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Absorb it and just go, okay, cool, let's keep going, right? Sort of like that scene in a movie that you don't really understand and you're like, wait, why did that happen? I don't understand. But like you don't need to, or like you left the room, you came back, nothing really changed. You were just going in the same direction. You could probably assume what happened, right?
Yeah.
And continue. So yeah,
Mhm.
so I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep moving then. We've only got one last um paragraph in this passage, so let's check it out. From the theoretical perspective I have constructed, it is entirely possible to understand urban social movements as predominantly socio-political reflections of some broader politics or even biological imperatives. Okay, so this is, I mean, they're stating this is the perspective I have constructed. Okay, so everything that I've said is what I've constructed. And it sounds like we're asking the implications of this. There's something about politics, something about biology. To me, what I'm understanding most clearly is like this is impactful. There's a lot of insight we can grab from the things that I've talked about. It's almost like kind of patting the author patting themselves on the back. Like it's very important what I have said. That's
Right.
kind of what this sentence does for me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, cool.
Cool. In a cooperative model, this involves acquiring goods and equally distributing them under the direction of the city itself. Okay, so this idea of distribution, this is pretty different. It almost sounds like what we're saying is in a cooperative model, which we've talked about as a cooperative cities should distribute goods, acquire and distribute goods equally. The city should do this and the city should direct it. I mean, it feels kind of random, but that isn't that's an argument, especially coming from the sentence where we said, I have constructed this model. And because we've hit on cooperation now in both paragraph 4 and 5, how better cities should cooperate, I feel like, all right, this is equal distribution. Basically, we need to help distribute goods. Something about equality, at least, in cooperation.
That's it. Yeah, and this is a unique argument for sure.
Yeah. It's building off cooperation, but we never talked about what a cooperative society even looks like. It's just that that's better, basically, and it's possible to design.
Exactly. So the author is going expanding into it, right? What is
Mhm.
cooperation looking like?
Mhm. So there are, in fact, many versions of this, albeit none that are perfect. Okay, so many versions, none that are perfect. We're still talking about cooperative societies. Let's see, let's see if they talk about some versions. Let's just see what we get into. We actually only have one more sentence, so probably not going to get too far into different versions, but we see the political machine politics of many cities in the US, a much maligned system of governance that often worked well for immigrants, the poor, and even for certain elements of business, making Mayor Daley's Chicago of the 1960s into, quote, the city that worked, is predominantly a political version of this. Okay, it sounds like we're trying to expand on what a cooperative model would look like. Because again, the last sentence was there's many versions of this. It sounds like we're trying to hit at political machine politics and Chicago as being an illustration of cooperative model, right? Because it says this is a predominantly political version of this, but I feel like, it's helping me understand that you care about what you've said about the cooperative model and equal distribution of goods, but I don't know how clear and actionable this sentence is. What do you think?
I think this is just more of like an example.
Mm-hmm.
I just understanding that this is sort of going along the same lines of that idea, and it's not, just giving us some sort of illustration of how that works.
Yeah. So Daily in Chicago or the political machine politics. Again, they told us there are many versions of this. And then right after, they gave you a specific version of it. So it's probably supporting their cooperation point in P6.
Not giving us a good idea of how it works, but like,
Hmm.
oh, look, by the way, here's, this one instance that it can occur in Chicago, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, that's where it stops. And I'm glad because I don't want to know a lot more. Like, not that I don't want to know now, but like I'm in a test. I just want to get to the point, right?
Yeah.
And so at least this is giving me context to how like there's an example to it. So if I get a question about Mayor Daley's Chicago, then I'll know what it's referring to. If I want as much info as I need, and that's it, right? To get through.
Hmm.
And I think they gave us that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's the end of P6. That's our final paragraph. So now comes a time to reflect. What was the point of this? Why is this a Cars passage? What was the ultimate message that we see from the author? Jack, what do you think?
I say whenever an argument reappears in more than one paragraph, this is something we teach our students in our courses. It's an important idea. It's part of our main idea. And there seems
Hmm.
to be two ideas that kept repeating, right?
Hmm.
The first idea was this idea that men make cities and that ends up shaping them, right?
Hmm.
That's definitely repeated in paragraph one and two, and it's pointed out through different people, but ultimately the author kind of sides with that idea
Hmm.
correctly. And then this other idea that planning better cities would bring out, our cooperative nature.
Yeah.
I think that's also repeated in multiple paragraphs. It's interesting because even though this passage had 6 paragraphs, there were only 4 or 5 ideas, right? And so, that's common, right? Again, we're going to have on average one idea per paragraph, and so typically an idea will repeat somewhere, and that becomes our main idea. This idea of equality is very narrow to paragraph 6, so I wouldn't consider that idea of like how cooperation actually works to be the main idea. More so, just this idea that planning the cities better, right, ends up making
Yeah.
us more cooperative. That's the main idea, not this idea of what cooperation really looks like. Uh,
Hmm.
but you should know cooperation is a positive thing, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like cooperation was really the focus of paragraph 4, 5, and 6, right? I always suggest to students if you've got two ideas that both seem pretty important, it's like, okay, I'm like, okay, you can have two important ideas, but which one is more important? Like if you got a question that was like, which of the following is the main idea of the passage? And it was that cities make men and are remade in the process, or planning better cities, involves fostering cooperation. Jack, which one would you pick?
I think that the first idea kind of built to get us to the second idea. Right.
Hmm.
I think the second idea seems to be more important to the author. This
Yeah.
idea that we have to plan the cities better, right? Like
Yeah.
the point of planning cities better makes us more cooperative stands only because this idea of like we're shaped by our cities, right?
Yeah.
The reason why the author is bringing up, oh, we're shaped by our cities is because the author really wants you to believe that if we plan the cities better, it'll bring out more cooperative stuff, right?
Mhm.
And that's why the author also argues, look, I understand that we don't adapt the same way biologically as we do culturally, right? Like that's I think why the author brought up that argument. right? To make it
Yeah.
more profound, right? So the whole point of this is to create mini arguments that kind of build on the bigger argument, right? Like kind of to help the bigger argument stand, right?
Hmm.
To have legs. And so your job is to understand where are the legs, which parts are the legs, and which part is the actual like, chair, right?
Yeah.
And so that I think that's the whole game. Like when we're reading this, I think you're the same way, Molly. I'm trying to understand how the author makes their argument. I'm trying to understand what is their support. What do they believe?
Mhm.
What do they not? I don't necessarily agree or disagree with any of their points. I think that's even better if you can do that, right? Like, but sometimes that can get you into trouble because you may agree with something that the author says, but then the author ends up disagreeing with it later, and then you just stick to your own art, whatever you believe. And so if you don't go with the author and you just stick to what you believe, you may actually mess up. So it's not a bad idea to bring in your like to think about it from your side, but remember these questions are based on the author's point of view, not yours, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I hope that clarifies how I would read it and how I would look at this structurally and what is important, what's not important.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And you're very right. Like we want to hesitate to bring in our own perspectives, but I like to think of it as like everyone is free to react to the passage.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can react, but you cannot interject your own beliefs, right? Like
definitely.
if they read some or if you read something that's like, "What? Are you serious?" Like, you know, all laws should be abolished and we should, like govern ourselves and do whatever. Like if that seems surprising to you, it's okay to feel surprise, right? Or to disagree, but you just have to have a lineup. It's like, you're at a zoo. You are watching the animals from behind a thick pane of glass. You cannot get into the enclosure. You are not
That's a
interjecting
great
yourself
analogy.
into the argument,
Yeah,
but you can react to it however you want. You are an
yeah,
observer, right?
yeah.
Do what you need to get involved and to get engaged, but you there's a pane of glass there for a reason. It's to help you with the questions by keeping yourself out of it, as crazy as that sounds.
I love that.
Um,
Love it.
yeah. Okay, so ultimately, we know what our main idea is. And as we talk about in our courses and in our free sessions, like the main idea will get you the vast majority of the questions. If you have not already, please go ahead and click on the link in the description to open up this passage. There are 6 questions that go along with this passage. So now that you are experts in urban species, and that you are armed with the essentially primary and secondary main ideas, now you have a chance to go through those questions and really see how are my elimination skills looking? Like how good am I at eliminating incorrect answers or finding the correct answer for a CARS question, right? So please go ahead and give these a try. Um, and if you want more CARS practice, come find us. We do CARS free sessions on our homepage. You can find our free sessions, jackweston.com. We do CARS sessions every week. If you want to interact with an instructor live and kind of get a sense of how we do things here, we encourage you to check out those sessions. They're a lot of fun, and our instructors are incredibly passionate about this. So please reach out if you need help. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been a super fun one, and thank you, Jack. And we hope to catch you in the next one. We put these episodes out every single week, so tune in again for another CARS passage. Bye, everyone.